Hello everyone, Ron again. The purpose of this video is to discuss ADSR and what that means. So, you'll notice here that I have a mini synth open, and that's what I'm going to use to discuss it in more depth. In some previous video, I covered what attack time means, but now I'll cover the rest of them. So ADSR stands for attack, decay, sustain, and release. And so you're going to notice here that that's what I have here. That's the wrong environment though. That's the filter attack time. Also, I should fix this, make it 0. So here we have a mini synth. Attack, decay, sustain, release. The attack time, whenever you play some sound, it has a maximum volume that it's going to reach. The attack time is how long it takes to get to that maximum volume or gain in this case. So let's say if I press a key, instantly there's a sound. Why? Because the attack time is at 0. So it takes no time. It starts out at its full gain or volume. The decay time is how long it takes to decay to the sustain level. So when you talk about attack versus sustain, if you think about an instrument like a flute, it has an attack time in the sense that it's not an immediate transient like a drum is. It's hard to explain this without breaking it down further. But a flute slowly rises to the maximum level that it's going to be, regardless of what note the flute plays, and that's why the timbre of the flute is like that. Now, when you have a sustained note, that is exactly what it sounds like, a note that's held out for some amount of time. Flutes, violins, saxophones, anything that plays legato has a sustain. But in terms of music production, there's an attack time that goes to a maximum value, and then there's a decay time, which is the amount of time it takes to stay at that maximum volume until you go to the volume that the instrument will be sustained at. Because the amount of volume that you output when you sustain the instrument may not be as loud as the loudest point. The release is the amount of time after the sustain is no longer being held down, because you think about it in the sense of a piano, because we're talking about digital audio, so I'm most likely going to be using the keyboard, right? So when I stop holding down the key, that's when the release time starts, and that is the amount of time that it takes before the sound decays to negative 60 decibels or even negative infinity. But at negative 60 decibels, you're probably not going to hear it anymore. It's going to be too quiet. So we're going to observe that here, and I'm going to show you what it means with audio examples. Starting with attack time. This is an immediate attack time. I press the key, and the sound happens immediately at its maximum volume. But as I increase the attack time, you will notice that it takes a bit longer to reach the maximum volume. Again, sorry for any noise. I recorded this video the same day as the other one, and my neighbors are still doing something next door. I don't know why they're still doing it, whatever it is. They took a break when I stopped recording the video, and when I started this one, then they began again. It sounds like there's an airplane out there too. That's actually hilarious. Anyway, back to the topic. So you'll notice the note will crescendo the longer the attack time is. And that's just because of what an attack time is. You could think of it as the amount of crescendo or the length of the crescendo that is going to be imposed upon the sound. But what's really cool is I was mentioning the flute earlier. So if you wanted to synthesize a flute sound, you give it a short attack time. So instead of this, let's look at the decay time. It will make more sense with no sustain. So think of a pluck sound. If I only had an attack and it immediately dropped, so that's with just the attack time. It has a short amount of time that it takes to crescendo to the max, and then it cuts off. Now as I increase the decay, it's going to take a little bit longer to disappear because the sustain is 0. So there's no sustain, it's just a transient. So watch this. So you see how it decays until the point where it starts to reach 0, but it reaches 0 because there's no sustain. So if I had a short decay time, back to right here. By the way, this type of sound is called a pluck. If I add sustain to it, and I hold the note down, so it has an attack that makes it crescendo to a max volume, then it decays quickly to the sustain volume. If I increase the sustain volume, it will be more obvious. And obviously, at its max, it will stay at that same sustain volume because the sustain volume is the maximum volume that it will hit. So let's decrease it for the sake of it, just continuing with this lesson. Now we look at the release time. That's the amount of time after the sustain is no longer being held that it will take the sound to decay to 0. So you'll notice by now, there's this popping sound that's been happening. And why is that? That's because there's no release time. Because, without being too complicated, we discussed the shape of a wave. So a waveform is going to have some amplitude. Usually it's represented as a sine wave. Most of the time when you see it, that goes from -1, which is the lowest point, to +1, which is the highest point. And if it's cut off when it's at the highest or lowest point, it's going to click because it does not go back to 0 in the way that it normally would. So when the sound has no release, that's why it's going to click, because the amplitude is at the higher point, and so that click is just it failing to be at 0. That's the best way I can think of to explain that offhand. Maybe I'll cover it in another video in more depth, but that should suffice for now, I think. But the point is that if you don't have release time and you hear some clicking noise, that's the reason why. When you increase the release, or in some cases the attack, the click will go away. So we're going to see that in action right now. You can think of release similar to how you can think of decay and reverb if you already understand how reverb works. So those are the 4 things that we're looking at. And using those, they construct what you call an envelope. So how the sound begins, how it transitions into its legato or sustained note, and how long it takes to drop down to 0 or -60, or just being inaudible after that sustained note is released. So that is the basics of ADSR. And I've been saying in a couple of videos that I was going to put some audio examples of me using things like distortion or saturation on the synthesizer. So I'm going to do that in this video just for fun. And that's sort of like a bonus if you stuck around to the end. So I hope that you enjoy it. I'm going to end with this audio example. And if there's any questions, if you see this video, comment them, or suggestions for another video for something that confuses you that I haven't done yet, or something that I have done yet that you want more information about, then leave them in the comments or DM me on some social media. And I just want to say that if any of this is confusing to you, I try hard to figure out simplified ways to explain it, but it may take a while to understand regardless, because you have to understand how to implement it. And so don't grow discouraged, because this is something that you're going to be able to do if you choose to, that is. I would figure that that's why you're watching this video, but maybe not. Maybe you're just entertained by me or something like that, or you just want to hear the audio example, whatever. Just remember, it could always be worse, right? Because think about it. There was one episode of the Powerpuff Girls where they ran away so fast that they ran into the future. And Miss Keene, for whatever reason, she stood there waving goodbye for 50 years. But you don't have to wave goodbye for 50 years, because if you're watching the video, then you have the information now. So keep that in mind. Thank you for watching, and have an awesome day.